TikTok videos are not real.
We have a whole generation of women who are burnt out at their career and they are tired of being a provider and a homemaker when they come home from their job.
The Chinese clock app has proved to be the perfect platform for women to post videos of themselves cooking, cleaning, gardening, frolicking in meadows, often while wearing pretty dresses. And it's found an audience of people who really enjoys watching it. But what really drove the visibility of the tradwife trend was the discourse. As soon as it started to get a serious viewing, everyone had to have an opinion about it. It was on every major commentary channel that I watched was a tradwife segment, and what was the tradwife take? Some people don't like the popularity of tradwives. They say that these videos promote a lifestyle that's unattainable or irresponsible or damaging to women or racist. While everyone agrees that being a stay-at-home mother is a legitimate life choice, not everyone wants that lifestyle to be elevated or celebrated. They don't want to tell women that they should be living this way, because that sounds a bit patriarchal or makes girl boss career women feel a little bit insecure. And putting your trust in your husband to support you financially is risky. What if women stop going to university because they expect a man to provide for them? And on the other hand, there's the question of whether it's really trad, that is traditional, to post videos of yourself on social media platforms, especially when the way these videos are presented caters to thirsty simps in the audience. The femininity in many of these videos is dialed up to the extreme, with sundresses, full faces of makeup, and nary a tattoo or a swear word in sight. It's a version of womanhood that would have been quite alien to most ordinary women throughout history. That is, the truly traditional wives are, our ancestors. Overall, it seems that the trad wives of TikTok don't have many friends on either the left or the right, at least when it comes to the terminally online. But their viewership is huge, and it is growing. First off, if you take nothing else from this video, I hope you'll hear me on this point. TikTok videos are not real. There is an epidemic of staged scenarios being presented as real, candid recordings. This goes for all those gym girls in skimpy clothes that are getting offended when men look at them. This goes for the street interviews where people give outrageous answers to the interviewer's questions. And it goes for the blue-haired snowflakes having mental breakdowns in their cars. In many cases, these are completely staged or intentionally played up to get views, at least. My default assumption is now to assume that anything I'm seeing in these kinds of videos is completely fake and staged, unless I've got a really good reason to believe that it's real. In the case of trad wives, I'm not suggesting that these women are purely actors who are just pretending that this is their kitchen and they're just pretending to make food. I think they really are wives, and they really are preparing actual food that they are going to eat later in their actual kitchen, but it's not exactly a candid recording. I think most people who watch it understand that what they're seeing is not the same process that she would go through to prepare this food if the camera was turned off. It's not the same food that she would make on a normal day. Like, this is an exaggeration of her life. She's wearing more beautiful clothes, more beautiful makeup than she would if she were just alone in her house or just alone with her children. So the videos aren't really real, and the people who are watching them, who they actually enjoy watching them, know that it's not really real. So what does that mean? We can't learn anything from this because it's all just people watching stuff that's not really happening, just like any other television. Well, I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Thinking back to the female celebrities and role models who were on television and in magazines when I was growing up, we didn't get many TV shows or, magazine covers that would glorify the role of the mother, or especially a stay-at-home mother. Being a housewife was something that was always depicted as being something that a very vapid, insipid woman would enjoy doing, or something that an intelligent, thoughtful woman would find very unsatisfying and mundane. We didn't have social media in those days. We could only we could see things in real life, or we could see things that a producer or an editor had put together for us to see and to receive. A Hollywood executive or a magazine editor would carefully compile images and and stories for us to consume that had maybe not an intentional agenda, but definitely had a bias. Like, these executive and editors are not sort of typical people who have normal, average beliefs about life. There are a certain class of people who have their own particular ideas about the world that they convey either intentionally or unintentionally through what they create. And I suppose from what we can see, the people who created the sort of mainstream media did not think it was worth glorifying the role of mother or wife, or especially not a trad wife or a stay-at-home mother. Or at least they didn't think that those characters would make an interesting story. They didn't think that that would make an interesting TV show or film. It was more interesting to have girls who were feisty and powerful and aggressive, girls who were sarcastic. This is what we saw. All these really beautiful actresses would be playing characters like this, and over time it just forms this picture in your mind of what really high-status, beautiful women are like, and what you should be like if you want to be considered high-status like they are. But now we have social media, and anyone, especially if you're beautiful, you can just make your own kinds of videos, make your own photos, write your own posts, and if those are popular with people, if people want to see those, then you can become popular without anyone's permission, without having any executive or editor sign off on it. You can become a sensation. You can become a very successful trad wife influencer. And I think what we're seeing is that general people who are trying to find interesting content to consume, there's a sort of unmet appetite for trad wives that is now being met by the trad wife influencers. Think of your average, just typical woman in her 20s. Most women in their 20s these days have a higher educational degree, or they've started higher education at least. So she spent 2, 3 or 4 years working for a degree in higher education that probably bears little resemblance to the job that she ends up dedicating most of her time to. She works full-time for 40 hours a week, plus a commute on an ugly motorway or some dirty mass transit system. She's usually unmarried. Statistically, most women in their 20s are unmarried, and that might mean that she's single and frustrated with the matches that she makes on dating apps, or she might be in a relationship with a man who is hesitant to commit to her. This life of the self-reliant working woman may not be as interesting or fulfilling as she thought it would be. It's not, you don't get to be Rachel from Friends, unfortunately. Most women end up working a rather unglamorous job that is rather tedious and difficult. And then one day there's a video just appearing in the algorithm in her feed of a trad wife. The video is of a beautiful woman with a beautiful home, with a husband who is so devoted to her that he will support her financially for the rest of her life. Whether the reality of being a trad wife is really desirable or not, it looks desirable in the video. And there is something in the video that the typical unmarried working woman is lacking. And by watching this video, the young working woman is invited into a soft, gentle world where you can be loved and cared for by a financially independent man. It's simply a fantasy, like so many other forms of stories, fictions, narratives. It's just escapism. It's the equivalent of a man enjoys watching an action movie about a man who goes around shooting lots of people. It doesn't have to be realistic. It doesn't have to literally be desirable. The point is that it's a fantasy. It's something that you don't get in your everyday life, that you get to experience vicariously through the characters you're watching on the screen. Of course, it's not just young working women who enjoy watching trad wives. There's also the overworked, working mother who wishes that she had this amount of time to care for her home and care for her children, and other stay-at-home mothers who are just watching to get tips and to get ideas for their own life. And I suppose there are also men watching, but I can't really speculate about what they're getting out of it other than hot woman is there saying nice things and smiling. But with that explanation out of the way, I want to step away from the trad wives of TikTok to talk about the reality of being a kept woman, a stay-at-home mother. As I've already made clear in this video, it's not all about sundresses and meadows of wildflowers. I just got back from filming an episode of Brokenomics with the 2023 Whom Would You Wed champion, Dan Tubb of the Lotus Eaters podcast. And in that conversation for his show, we examined the financial implications of parenthood in the UK and the factors that go into the decision mothers have to make about if and when to return to work after the birth of a child. My conclusion from my statistical analysis of the available data, my conclusion was that it is achievable for most families to survive on one full-time income probably from the father. And indeed there are about 25% of mothers with a child under 4 in this country who don't have any job at all. They don't work for even 1 hour a week in a paid position. And I argue in this discussion that that number could be higher if families would make a few sacrifices, if they were willing to live in a less capacious home or move to another area. That's not to suggest that all families absolutely must do this, but my point is that there are things that you can do that make living on one income achievable. And indeed, the costs of childcare to take care of a child while the mother is working are so high that you really don't have to do much part-time work or freelance work to make up that income that you would have been making if you were a full-time working mother outside of the home. In truth, a woman's decision to leave work to focus on her family and her children and her home is not a decision that most women make once and then stick with that for the rest of their lives. For most women in the modern economy, the period of motherhood where they are home with their children is just temporary. It's probably about 4 years in many cases. Some women stay off work to be at home for their children even while the children are attending primary school or elementary school. And so even while the woman is on maternity leave or while she's staying at home with her children, she's still in the back of her mind thinking about going back to work and getting back to that career that she's just taken a break from. Most women, but by the time that they get to 30 or 40, they have had at least one child. It's still quite a normal thing to happen. Despite whatever career she has up to that point, most women experience the stay-at-home mum period of their life for, at bare minimum, like 6 weeks, where they get to live their full tradwife experience. And similarly, there are very few tradwives who have never had a job. So what we're talking about is a spectrum of female lifelong behaviour, where at one end of the spectrum you have the full wine aunt girl boss career woman who never wants to have children at all. Maybe she's married or maybe she's not, but her career is the most important thing in her life. Or maybe she has some kind of passion, something other than family that is occupying her. And then there's a very small number of women. And in the middle of the distribution, you have a split between career or a job and your children. And you're trying to juggle those things. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the other extreme of a very small number of women who are fully tradwife, married in early 20s, who have many children, and after their children are all grown up, they can now be committed to being a grandmother after that. My point is that these extremes both represent a very small number of women compared to the vast majority of women who end up doing both at different times in their life. But for that middle of the distribution, these women who in most cases have a degree and expect their careers to be something that will make them financially stable for the rest of their lives and provide a fulfilling kind of basis for their life going forward, there is something I think that is a little bit amiss. I know demographics is something that my dedicated viewership is probably sick of hearing me talk about, so I'll try to be brief here. For a country, for a culture to survive, we need to have at least some women who are having more than 2 children. And assuming that you don't have triplets, you're probably going to want to space these children out by something like 2 to 3 years. And if you add all those together, you've got something like 6, 9, 12 years of your sort of prime years of your life are now dedicated to that. So as a woman, if you knew that that was what you wanted from your life at the age of 18, say, going to university doesn't really make sense. But on the other hand, if you're an 18-year-old woman, even if you know, and this is very rare, even if you know that you want to get married and have 3 children, how many suitors do you think you're going to get as an 18-year-old, 19, 20, early 20s woman? How many men are going to be ready to commit to you as a woman and to marry you and have those children with you? There are men who will do it, right? Especially in religious communities where that's sort of the expectation. But outside of very fringe, sort of fundamentalist religious communities, a woman is going to find it very difficult to find a man unless she's dating 10 years older than herself. So with that in mind, knowing that most men probably aren't ready to get married and have children, but most men in your own age cohort are not going to be ready to marry you until you're about late 20s, early 30s probably. It does sort of make sense to go to university and to get into the world of work. This is the channel that our education systems pushes women down, because it does kind of make sense, and it creates this sort of self-perpetuating vicious cycle where nobody's expecting you to get married before the age of 25, so you're not going to be able to find a partner before that age, so why even bother looking? You've got to, as a woman, prepare for the possibility that you're not going to be able to find a husband, and the best way to do that is to try to get a job that you like, try to get a job that pays as much as possible. And so getting shunted into this girl boss, career woman sort of way of life makes complete sense. From the perspective of an average 18-year-old, going to university just makes sense, or some other form of education or career. Then, when she does get married and does have her first child, you just have to switch off all of that life that she's been preparing for, this this job, this education, this mind that is now filled with corporate jargon and emails and Excel spreadsheets. Just switch that off and stop. Now the only thing you have to think about is a baby and your husband and your home. It is rather difficult for women to do that now that they've been raised in this environment with these expectations, to suddenly switch gears and become a mother of an infant, or maybe several infants for the next 10 years. And remember that we need to have some women at least some women need to be doing this 10 years of motherhood thing for the country to have a future. We're not setting women up for to have proper expectations for their future. But I can't really suggest anything better in this current environment. We're sort of already down this self-perpetuating vicious cycle where, women do need to prepare themselves to be financially independent, because men aren't going to settle down with them yet. They're not. They're going to have to support themselves for the next 10 years. So, getting a job and going to university just makes sense. To be successful in your career or in your job, you've got to really value it. You've got to sort of be climbing, to be aspiring to be better at your job, to always be searching for the next opportunity. And I think it's this orientation of your value structure of your life that really gets messed with once you have to step away from that to have a family. All those things that you used to think were important, you either still think that they're important and that you're missing out and not fulfilling your potential, or you just have to stop finding those things important anymore, which is kind of a difficult mental acrobatics to do. Abby Shapiro, classically Abby, the sister of Ben Shapiro, has a lot of videos about being a stay-at-home mother and how she finds it really difficult after being an opera singer professionally to just quit that to be with her children.
I struggle with feeling like I'm not fulfilling my potential, or like I'm not doing something important enough for people to like give me credit for.
Opera singing is a really important thing that she could be doing that she's missing out on due to her family. And I think that's exactly the mindset that women find really difficult. And other than the financial burden of not being in the workplace, I think it is another main reason why women do go back to work, because they've already trained their brain to be on that corporate ladder, to find that stuff important. The trend we're seeing among women is that the age of marriage for women is increasing. It's increasing for men as well, but the age of marriage is increasing, and more women are going into higher education. And putting these two trends together, it kind of paints an image of women who are delaying marriage and delaying motherhood for the sake of their education and their career. But it is pretty common. I think it's the average woman still looks forward to the day where she'll be a mother and have children. It's sort of a remote possibility for young women that one day they'll do this thing, but it doesn't feel urgent and it doesn't feel relevant to them now at the age of 22 or 25. They just sort of think that they'll be able to incorporate marriage and children into their existing life if they just focus on work. If they try to own a home, perhaps, then they'll be able to just sort of shove the kids in somewhere in there, or just like place it neatly on top, and then the life will be complete. And this attitude of postponing it or waiting until you're ready is, I think, leading to many women who are ending up disappointed, or ending up childless, not by their own choice. There's also this factor of geography. The way that women and men now are going to university in higher numbers than in previous generations means that we are splitting up families geographically across the country. Sometimes people even go to university in a different country, but you'll often end up 100 miles or more away from your parents. That support structure that really comes in handy when you have your own children, your siblings and your parents who would be there to help you with your children, are now 100 or more miles away, several hours away by transport. And if you don't have a spare room for them to stay in, well, then you might not get many visits from them, which is just one other way that being career-oriented and going to university does impact motherhood later in life. While I was in the middle of making, editing, all that with this video, I started to see a lot of people talking about this e-celeb drama with Steven Crowder and his divorce that's been going on with his wife. It was popular about a year ago. Some Ring doorbell footage got leaked and people were sort of dissecting that and talking about it. But now we have a little bit more information about the divorce, and it's so relevant to this video that I really couldn't release this video without including this discourse about Steven Crowder and his stay-at-home wife. I don't really want to get into the particulars of their ongoing lawsuit, their court case. There are now a lot of people who are, right-wing people as well, claiming that she did not contribute to any of this wealth that Crowder acquired over the course of the marriage, and therefore she's not entitled to any money now. And I think that's a really commonly held belief, and I think that it's wrong on sort of many levels. So when it comes to tradwives or stay-at-home mothers becoming financially vulnerable, it's sort of true. It can be a precarious situation, but I think the really inspiring thing about tradwives is that they they are not worried about that because they trust their husbands. That means that they're not planning to get divorced. They're not thinking like, oh, what happens if, or that they're not expecting this to happen. They're not preparing themselves for this situation, which from some people's perspective is reckless, but or naive, but it is also kind of inspiring. Like, that is what marriage used to be in the trad sense, is that you were bound together financially. You weren't planning to get divorced. It was not something that you would even entertain as a possibility because it was just not possible. I think if you're interested in making your marriage work, then it really is the only way to approach marriage. You can't be making provisions for, what if this goes wrong? Like, what if she betrays me? Like, don't get married. If you're thinking about that, just don't do it, because that's not what you're getting in for. But my point is that a lot of women who work, a lot of married women, a lot of mothers who work, they feel like they could support themselves, and they could even support their children if they had to on their own, whether that be at the unexpected death of their husband, or if he decides to pack up and leave, or decides to have an affair or become abusive. Like, this is something that a lot of modern women feel that they could take on to become financially independent from their husbands if the worst should happen. And that is just not an option that trad wives have usually. But all of that is to say that I don't think it's really possible to properly compensate a woman for all the work that she's done as a trad wife, as a mother. And furthermore, even just going down this tangent is kind of irrelevant, because being a trad wife is so tied up with this idea of, being all in. Like, you're all in your marriage. You haven't got one foot out the door thinking about how you could support yourself in the event of your husband leaving you, cheating on you, abusing you. In situations where you're planning for a divorce, I think you're probably already halfway there.
The women who set these backup plans in place for if their husband were to cheat or divorce them are the women who did not stress enough in their dating life. They were really ignorant to certain things. They forgave things they probably shouldn't have forgiven. Therefore, when they got married, that is when they became stressed about the potential of their marriage.
My point with this video, and I know it's gone on a long tangent, but I think this mixed bag approach to womanhood and motherhood that we now go to as a default for our society and our culture is not working out that well. And sure, not every system is perfect, but I think there's a kind of lack of transparency that we are subjecting women to when we don't really tell them honestly what their life is going to look like when they eventually do want to have children, or when they do have children. There's a kind of bait and switch feel to the whole arrangement. But to bring it all full circle back to trad wives, I don't think we have to be afraid of girls watching these videos who are now going to forget about university and just wait around for a man to marry them. I don't think that's really going to happen in any large number of cases. What typically happens when people encounter new ideas and new kinds of ways of thinking and people, they don't immediately switch from one idea to the other, from one ideology to the next one. They will take on a few ideas and a few habits and things from this new idea structure that they've encountered, and it'll just sort of push them a little bit towards this new way of life, this new way of thinking. And so what I expect we'll see, if there is any trend at all, and there probably won't be, statistically, I expect this won't register as a blip. But if there were to be a trend based on this trad wife popularity, I'd expect it to be maybe a slight increase in number of people getting married younger. Maybe women being married to perhaps older men who are ready for marriage. You might get maybe fewer women going into higher education, or you might just get women staying off work for a bit longer after the birth of their child. Sort of prolonging that period of dedicated motherhood before going back to work, now that they have a newfound appreciation for the role of mother in the home. But in truth, I think we're more likely to see just superficial fashion trends following the popularity of tradwives. You know, things like women growing their hair longer, getting sort of less extreme colours in their hair, less extreme colours of makeup, sort of more naturalistic look, more dresses, less tattoos and piercings. This is the tradwife aesthetic is the easiest thing to change about yourself, is just to change the clothes you wear and the way you dye your hair. So this is probably what we'll see as a resurgence of these kinds of fashion trends for a few years. But really, who am I to comment on fashion trends? I don't know anything about it. But I do like the tradwife aesthetic. I like their dresses, and I like their pretty hair, and I like their meadows of wildflowers and their sourdough. So thanks, tradwives. Even if it's a grift, it's a good one, in my opinion. So keep at it. And thanks everyone for watching. Why did I make this video? I don't know. It feels like every time I make a video these days, I really think there must be something more important in the world going on. And yet, I have so many thoughts, and there's such a hunger, people out there misunderstanding things, not understanding things, and I just want to clear this up. I want to make it understood what's going on with my basic understanding of the world. But you're here watching it, so you must think it's interesting at least. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Leave your comments, as always. I love reading your comments. I always read them all. And I'll see you again really soon, I hope. Go watch Brokenomics with Poe the Person when it comes out. If it's not out already. If it's out, I'll leave a link in that.
Yeah.
I wonder about the strategy of reform. I don't know if they're expecting to get into power, or if they are just trying to apply pressure to the...
Well, they've got an opportunity,
the way that UKIP did with Brexit, just to say, okay, we're stealing your votes, so whoever gets into power, if you want those votes back, you better look at our policy sheet and adopt a few of them.
That they made the Tories have to pretend that little bit harder.
Yeah, I think the problem with that is that, yeah, you can force them to adopt your policy proposals on paper, but you're still not going to force them to actually do it.
Well, there was a referendum on Brexit.
Well,
whether that actually ended up mattering in the end.
Well, yeah, but
there was a vote.
Outside of just having Brexit, all of the policy goals that were supposed to come from Brexit
were
completely betrayed.